Now, most of the world's population lives in emerging markets, including South Africa. Emerging markets account for more than 75% of global growth in output and consumption. But are we reaching our potential? Academics meeting in Johannesburg today have been discussing how emerging markets like South Africa can market their goods to the world and how these markets can grow. A conference at Wits Business School, including the Emerging Markets Conference Board, a global initiative by a marketing scholar with support from scholars around the world. Now we chat to one of the experts in emerging markets who was appointed by China to help drive the globalization of Chinese brands. So that's Professor Jan-Benedict Steenkamp from the University of North Carolina. Thank you for being with us,
My
Professor.
pleasure.
So why are you helping China market its goods to the world when everybody else is saying that there's Chinese goods everywhere?
Well, that is true. I find it very interesting because I'm a branding guy, and when you look at China, they do export a whole lot, but they do export very little under their own brand names. So, for example,
so you mean they're assembling everybody else's goods, basically?
Yes. Do you have a Honhai product?
A what?
A Honhai product?
Honhai, no. Not as far as I know.
No. Do you have an Apple iPhone?
Yes.
Yes, that is a Honhai product.
Yeah, yeah.
So the idea is best said is that Honhai has a profit margin of 3%, Apple has a profit margin of 30%. That's the power of branding. And the Chinese companies like to get piece of the action as well. And so can South African companies.
So let's stay with China, because that's changing with Huawei and other brands.
Yes.
Is that strategy successful to finally start selling Chinese brands?
Yes, it is very successful. They come from essentially zero, so it isn't as if everything is sold under brands yet. But when you look at the brand value of Huawei, which is currently in the tens of billions of dollars, and Huawei started selling smartphones around the world without their own brand. Now they hardly sell anything anymore under anything but the Huawei brand, and the third largest seller in the world. So that is pretty successful.
So how do you go from zero to being very successful, at least in smartphones?
Well, they did actually two things. First of all, they invested a tremendous amount in R&D, which meant that the Huawei phones are no longer inferior to a Samsung, an Apple, or perhaps just only a little bit below that. And if you then offer them for a slightly more attractive price, then you have a branding story that people can truly believe in. And they've been very successful doing that. But without a good product, branding is useless.
I'm interested in the whole debate about whether China can be innovative. You know, the idea is always the US, the free countries will be much more innovative, but you're saying they are overcoming and moving ahead.
Yes, and that is actually something that puzzles many people, including it puzzles me, because honestly, when you are in China and you try the internet, it is maddeningly slow and you can't access Google, you cannot access a lot of other things. But China is really doing a lot of innovative stuff by pouring a lot of money in R&D. Now, we don't know if they were a free society whether they wouldn't be even more innovative. I would not rule that out. But they have overcome, and when I go to the headquarters of ZTE or Huawei or so in Shenzhen, it is like a Bond movie. You know, I'm driven around in electric cars rather than anything else. So it is something that I've never seen in a Western country.
Okay, so what can South Africa learn from what China is doing in its efforts to market to the world?
If I may say, when I am in China, first of all, the Chinese have a lot of pride in China, and if I talk to top managers, they tell me, JB, we want our own Chinese leading brands sold around the world. So they have a lot of pride in their country and they see it somewhat as a mission. Now, of course, I'm not an expert on South Africa, but when I talk with South African managers, even today at the conference, people are saying, you know, what do we manufacture? What can we sell around the world? So some of it has to do with pride and confidence in the competence of the country. And then the second aspect is see opportunities. Where is your competitive strength as South Africa? And you have a number of them.
Like the financial sector, you were saying?
I think the financial sector is very strong. Because South Africa has a great advantage of being a stable democracy. Of course there is some turmoil, especially recently, but compared to a lot of other countries, I mean, I live in the United States, you know, in terms of turmoil, I think we have a lot there as well, even more than in South Africa. And so that is necessary. You also have to have a lot of capital available. That is also there. You have to have a lot of competence available. That is also there. And you have to have an infrastructure in Johannesburg. You know, London is the center of much of the financial world, but Johannesburg is that for very much for Africa as well. So you have a lot there going, and when you just look at the UK, their trade surplus in financial services runs in the tens of billions of pounds, and it gives jobs to countless of people. I believe there is a great opportunity for South Africa.
So is there an African story, a South African story that we should tap into? Can you as an outsider look and see something that we're not harnessing?
Yeah, and I would say the banking is one thing. The story there has to be much more rational, if you will, in terms of stable institutions. I think
it's not emotive.
No, but South Africa has a couple of things in terms of emotion which are great. And one of the things that resonates around the world is that South Africa has achieved the thing that nobody had thought, you know, a high degree of racial harmony. Well, it may not be ideal here, but currently what we see in America, again, a lot of racial tension, unfortunately, with the Me Too movement. And the South African story about, you know, how Mandela essentially brought people together and how the country is moving forward, that resonates not only in Africa, but because people are really looking for a positive story about Africa. So that itself resonates not only with business people, also with ordinary people.
So we have this uniqueness, but we also fit into this broader category of emerging markets. Why a whole focus on marketing for emerging markets? You know, don't the same tricks work? What's so different?
The same tricks work a little, but it is a little more difficult when you're talking about emerging markets. The moment, for example, that you say machinery comes from Germany, automatically people want to buy it.
Yeah.
The country of origin image of emerging markets like South Africa or China for that matter or Brazil is not nearly so positive. So you have to overcome some of these hurdles a little bit. Plus, the economic development is somewhat earlier, so you have to look a little bit more where are your strengths. Whereas in a country like Germany or France or the UK, it is very obvious where their strengths are. Take, for example, one of the things that I believe personally is undervalued is wine. Now, wine seems like a mundane category, but it employs a lot of people. And when you look at Spanish wine, sells for half of the price of Italian wine. Now, Italian wine is a lot cheaper than French wine, and South African wine is cheaper than Spanish wine. So a lot can be, if we talk about agriculture, a lot can be gained if South Africa would work on itself as a country of origin for wine, just like Australia and New Zealand have done, and they have become major powers in wine.
And a big debate here is why aren't African markets trading with one another? But I guess it's that problem in Africa. You've got loads of people, but they don't always have the money to buy the goods.
That is true, although we see a lot of growth going on in South Africa and in other African nations. Ethiopia is another good example. Perhaps South Africa, but I mean, I'm an outsider, so I'm not commenting on politics, but if South Africa could take the lead in the African Union to essentially create a little bit more of trade conditions that you see in the European Union, that would be a major step forward. Because let us not forget, the European Union is an economic powerhouse of the first rank, but about 70% of the total trade in the European Union is within the European Union. In Africa, that is much lower, and that is, I think, unfulfilled potential. But the European Union is a project of Germany and France. They kind of brought it together.
Yeah.
Perhaps in Africa, it is South Africa with another nation. Somebody
Nigeria,
has to really trigger it.
All right, thank you so much. I love this positivity about our potential. That was Professor Jan-Benedict Steenkamp from the University of North Carolina. We'll be back with more news after a short break.